Hello, welcome. My name is Liliana Blackstar of Hestia's Muse, and I just wanted to hang out a little bit and talk about some astrology with you today. Particularly, I wanted to talk about the dark moon, and that is what I consider to be the waning period of the moon that's right before the new moon. So we're going to talk about the waning dark moon in Aries and some shadow work and maybe personal healing or meditation work that you can do with that energy. So welcome. Grab yourself a cup of tea, get cozy. This is just going to be a really casual little chat. So I wanted to do a little introduction first. My name is Liliana Blackstar. I am an astrologer. You can find my website at hestiasmuse.net. You can also find me on Patreon under the name Hestia's Muse and on Facebook and Instagram under the name Hestia's Muse. I love astrology and I love talking about astrology, and I have been wanting for a while to do more video and audio content. I do a lot of writing on my blog and on my social media, and I wanted to try to start offering some video blogs or a podcast, and I've been thinking about it and preparing for it for a while. And the thing is, I'm a Capricorn sun and rising, which sometimes can translate as being a little bit slow with getting started on things, or I can even get stuck in the startup process because I'll have an idea, and before I start, Capricorn wants to do things right? So I say, oh, I've got to get all the supplies I need. I need to research the best way to do this. I got to do it right. So if I want to do a video, I need to get a ring light and a better webcam and a microphone. And I want to make sure that I'm in my makeup and dressed nice for every episode so I look really professional and have people take me seriously. And then I get stuck because, let's be honest, I don't always have the time and energy to do all that. And I don't have the money right now to get all the equipment that I need. And so I kept putting it off and putting it off. And then I realized I'm just never going to start if I have these goals of I can't start until these things are ready. And I don't feel good about that. I want to just start, and yeah, it might not be the greatest quality right away, but we'll get there, right? We'll get there. It's going to be fun. I have to let myself enjoy the process and not be such a perfectionist, which can be an issue with the Capricorn rising. And I have a lot of Virgo in my chart. So, particularly during this Aries season, tuning into the Aries energy of just do it, just let's get started. Let's be proactive and bold and courageous and do the thing. And yes, it's nearly the end of Aries season, but here I am. I'm in my sweatpants and sweatshirt today, hair up, no makeup. And I said, you know what? I'm inspired to record something for the video blog and the podcast. And there was that voice like, I don't have the right equipment. I need to do my makeup. I need to get dressed. I need to put up a nice background behind me. And I said, stop. Let's do this the Aries way and just go. Just go for it and see what comes out. So I'm happy that you're here with me. Thank you so much for sitting through my little mini introduction of, hi, I'm not really 100% sure what I'm doing with this podcast yet, but I'm going to get started anyways. Let's do it, right? So I want to ideally offer some kind of astrological perspective that is like a pagan, spiritual, devotional practice, based on what's happening astrologically. And through that, sometimes I might tune into just the cycles and phases of the moon. Sometimes there might be other astrological movements or aspects that inspire me to talk about something. I can compare the energies of the current astrology to mythology and archetypes, and then we can have through that just a little discussion about how these archetypes and energies might manifest in our life and how we can mindfully and intentionally engage with that energy in a way that helps us live in the present moment with that astrology, rather than astrology is just something that's happening to us. I like to see it as something that we can engage with and dance with. And so I'm really excited to start offering, hopefully more frequently, these little video and or podcast clips to offer you some guidance in having a more mindful devotional practice that is geared for people on a spiritual path that is primarily pagan or witchy. So if that's you and you're interested in that, I think you're in the right place, and I hope you'll stick around and see what we have in store. Anyways, without further ado, today I wanted to talk about the dark moon and the waning dark moon in Aries specifically. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about what I consider to be a dark moon. Some people also call the new moon the dark moon, and that's valid and fine. In my mind, I like to differentiate between the period before the sun and moon conjunction as the dark moon and the period after the moon and sun conjunction as the new moon. And that just makes more sense to me. I've also seen it described that way by, I think it was Demetra George in the Mysteries of the Dark Moon book. And so personally, I consider the dark moon to be the waning moon that is in the final 30 degrees before the new moon. And then when the moon and sun have their conjunction, that's to me the period of rebirth and the beginning of the new moon. And then the new moon emerges waxing from the sun. And while it's still in 10 degrees conjunction after it emerges, then I would consider that the new moon. And then it goes on to be a waxing crescent. Excuse me. So that's just how I like to differentiate between the dark moon versus the new moon. So the waning crescent moon that we are in currently today is April 16th, and I'm hoping to have this published by April 17th. So the waning crescent moon enters the sign of Aries on April 17th at 6:09 p.m. Pacific time. It will be a dark moon at this time because by those standards I mentioned before, a waning crescent that is within 30 degrees of the sun. So the sun is only 30 degrees ahead of the moon, and the moon is catching up. So it's 30 degrees away from the sun, and it will become a new moon when it makes its conjunction with the sun. So the dark moon has this period where the moon returns to the section of the zodiac where it was previously a new moon at the beginning of this lunar cycle. So it has come full circle and it returns back to the position where the last new moon was. The last new moon was at 0 degrees Aries with the vernal equinox, the spring equinox if you're in the northern hemisphere. And so we had this very powerful feeling of starting over again with the new moon in Aries at 0 degrees. So as soon as this current waning crescent moon enters Aries, it is right back where it was a month ago when we started the new moon, when we started the last lunar cycle. And we have to so we've come full circle. We're back where we started when we set our intentions with the new moon a month ago. So in that sense, it's like before we had this moon in the same position as a new moon and beginning to crescent. And now we have it as a waning dark moon, releasing and letting go. So we have this period where it's really a period of conclusion, the end of the moon cycle, the very end, the time for deep rest, reflection. We have a period of the dark moon that I feel is very good for meditation, divination, and shadow work. If we compared it to a bigger cycle of the year, the dark moon is like the final weeks of winter, right before the spring equinox. So in terms of gardening, this is a good time for composting and preparing the soil for planting. It's not, you plant it with the new moon or right after the new moon, but before you plant your seed, you have to prepare your soil. You're going to clear away the weeds, right? Clear away the debris and the leftover dead stuff that hasn't quite broken down into nutrients yet. Pull out any trash that might have gotten in there, and you have this empty space that you are going to plant your seed in. So that's like a really good metaphor for this period of rest and reflection and meditation and shadow work. We are going to clear away the debris so that we can prepare the soil for the seed that we're going to plant with the new moon and with the waxing moon. So as we rest and reflect in this final darkness before the rebirth of the new moon, our inner work can help us refine the goals that we set with the new moon. When we have taken time to reflect on the past and let go of debris or guilt or shame or mistakes and clear away this space, it helps us really have a clearer picture of what kind of intentions we want to set for this next cycle. We get a clearer picture of what we want to wish for and what we wish to try to work on and manifest in this next cycle. So this period of rest and clearing away the debris and letting go of things is a really important part of the cycle. And I personally love a nice dark moon cycle. So just like people, every astrological sign and archetype has a shadow side. Sometimes this is described as the negative expression of a sign. Though personally, I would encourage breaking free from the judgment of negative or positive for these energy expressions. For example, anger is not necessarily a negative feeling, but how we respond to anger can have consequences that are either negative or positive, right? Depending on the outcomes and perspectives. And so just saying like, this is the bad side of Aries energy. This is the good side, is too reductive. And I want to avoid thinking of that as just black and white, but recognizing that there is a shadow side. There are less mature parts of the energy. There's more mature parts of the energy. But even in that, we tend to think of more mature as positive and less mature as negative. But a child is not a negative thing, right? A child being asked to do the work of an adult is probably not going to work out. But childhood and youth is not negative. And therefore, just saying that something is mature versus immature is not saying that maturity is good and immaturity is bad. It's just saying, here's the more adult, grown like way of seeing things, and here's the fresh, childlike, innocent way of seeing things. So every sign in the zodiac has both its mature and its immature aspects. It has its fleshed out aspects versus its new, fresh aspects. And the time of the dark moon is a time that I like to look at the shadow, look at the side of the energy that is often pushed away or unappreciated or not talked about as much. So Carl Jung described our shadow self as a part of us that is hidden. In Jungian psychology, the human psyche is seen as divided into the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. We have our conscious awareness, and those are the thoughts and feelings that we are aware of, right? We're consciously thinking about doing this or that. And we have the subconscious, and these are the impulses and feelings that we have rise up unexpectedly because they're not coming from our conscious mind, but from our subconscious. Or they're a part of us that we're not even really aware of, right? The shadow self is just those parts of ourself that we are not consciously aware of. It doesn't mean it's the bad side. It's just the part that's not in our conscious awareness, right? So the point of shadow work is to acknowledge that a part of your subconscious that is suppressed or rejected or hidden. And then it's not the shadow anymore once you acknowledge it, once you see it, once you bring it into the light. We all have parts of ourselves that are shadow, a desire or an instinct that has been hidden away from ourselves or the people around us. So in shadow work, you acknowledge this part of yourself and you accept it. That doesn't mean that you suddenly are like, I love this part of myself and I'm going to behave that way all the time. Because some parts of the shadow are there because, that's behavior that gets us in trouble and we don't want to do that. So simply bringing this part of yourself into your conscious awareness is the shadow work. So that acting or not acting in a certain way is a conscious choice rather than a subconscious action. When we have integrated the shadow into the conscious mind, then when we have those impulses, we are aware of them. We're aware of where they're coming from, and we have the consciousness to choose whether to engage with those impulses or not. Versus an impulse that is in the shadow, it's hidden, the impulse arises, we don't have the opportunity to reflect on it because we don't even see it until it's coming out, right? So the point of shadow work is often to just look at, oh, I did this thing, I didn't mean to, or I didn't think it through. Where did that impulse come from? Why do I hide that impulse from myself? And how can I bring that part of myself into conscious awareness so that I can choose actively and consciously whether or not to behave in that way? So when we have the dark moon, that very end of the lunar cycle, and the moon is coming back to the sign it was in with the new moon, we have this opportunity to sink into this clearing away the weeds part of mindset, this shadow work of like, I'm going to dig around in the soil and, oh, look, there's a piece of plastic in the soil. I don't want that there when I plant my seed, right? I have to throw that away. Or, oh, look, there's a root of another plant here that is already planted, but it had died. Maybe if I water this root and work on this root, it can come back to life. And I don't have to plant a brand new seed here. There's already something planted here that we had forgotten about. So there's this opportunity to look into the shadow aspect of each sign. And the sign, like I said, has these aspects that are frowned upon or pushed away or not talked about as much because there's judgments about those behaviors. So we want to look at the archetype within ourself and acknowledge the parts that are shadow so that we can bring them into consciousness, and then they're not shadow anymore. So regardless of whether you have planets in Aries in your birth chart, you experience the archetype of Aries in your life. So that Aries energy is definitely about starting new things. It's about being bold and courageous, taking a stand, defending your position, being active and energetic, being selfish in the sacred ways. You know, there's good selfishness. There's the positive, like, I have to take care of myself, having boundaries, and saying, yes, I want this, and no, I don't want that. So I'm going to go get this, and no, I'm going to reject that, is kind of that basic Aries archetype energy. Standing up for and defending yourself or others when you see that something is worth protecting and defending, that's tapping into that Aries energy also. And a little bit of impulsivity and being like having that drive to just jump in and do something without thinking too hard about it. Just taking action, right? It's letting go of hesitation and just jumping in. So those are Aries activities or archetypal energies that we can generally consider to be positive. And through Aries season, while the sun has been in Aries, and we've had this Aries lunar month that started with the new moon in Aries, hopefully a lot of us have been working on integrating these Aries energies into our life, or noticing where these Aries energies manifest. As I said, like, I did a lot of thinking about like how I sometimes can lack impulsivity to the point of like overthinking something and not getting started, and needing to just tap into that Aries energy of saying, okay, I'm going to do this, even though I don't necessarily feel like I'm 100% ready. If I wait till I'm ready, I'm never going to get started. So at some point, I have to pull on that Aries energy and say, here I am, let's just do this and get started. So the shadow side of Aries energy is looking at things, these same archetypes, but the ways that they can sometimes manifest with negative intentions, or maybe coming from a place that's not for the greatest good, or just taking them too far so they don't have the best consequences, right? So being bold and courageous is often a good thing. There's times that you need courage and boldness to get things done. But sometimes boldness and courage can be used as a mask to cover up fear and insecurity. And therefore it's hard to be vulnerable and let others see your fears or discomfort, right? So you cover it up with this strong face and this courageous demeanor because you don't want others to see that you're afraid and uncomfortable. You don't want others to see you as vulnerable. But that leads to pride or just being inauthentic, because we are so concerned with our image that we refuse to let other people see our vulnerability. So one thing that can be a shadow side of Aries is when the strength and courage of Aries turns to pride or turns into putting on a false mask of strength, right? Being macho and not letting anyone see your true self, or not wanting to be seen as weak. So you make up this strong mask persona that's not actually ever allowing you to be vulnerable or let people see you make mistakes. And that can be a kind of lonely life, right? Or you can push people away because you're prideful and you're super egotistical and narcissistic, right? Because you just keep putting on this I'm perfect, I'm strong, I've got everything together, and never needing to ask for help. And that turns into judging other people who are asking for help. So that pride can really be a slippery slope that turns into narcissism, and we all have tendencies towards narcissistic patterns and behaviors, but we don't want to go down that path to the point of dysfunction and like harming other people, right? So courage and strength, sometimes, yes, very good. We need to be bold. We need to be courageous, but not to the point where we are being prideful, narcissistic, and egotistical. So that's something to examine as we do our shadow work with the Aries dark moon is my pride like running away with me? Is my courageousness taking things too far? Am I being too bold and too pushy and turning into narcissism? It's good questions to ask yourself, because sometimes we don't take the time to reflect. We just tell ourselves, oh, I need to be strong and courageous because our society tells us we got to be strong. There's so much music that tells us to stand up for ourselves and roar and be proud of yourself. And that's all beautiful until you take it too far, right? So you can see how the archetype of a sign is, there's one thing, but that can be good or it can be bad, depending on what direction you take that energy or how you implement that energy. It's okay to be proud of yourself for the things that you've done that are worthwhile and the energies that you have put forth to do amazing things. It's beautiful to be proud of yourself for a job well done. It is not so beautiful to be proud that you exist and think of yourself as better than other people, right? So there's a balance that has to be found there. So another one with the Aries energy is, yes, there are times when you need to take a stand and fight for what is right. Yet, if you lose control of those impulses, sometimes you can take actions that result in real harm. So what I'm talking about is when the boldness of Aries turns into rage, anger, and violence. And this relates to losing control in a way that causes harm to yourself or others. When we lose control of our impulses, we can end up hurting ourselves or other people. Our impulses ourselves are not necessarily get good or bad, but we want to make sure that we maintain some kind of control over those impulses. We do not usually benefit from losing our head and flying off the handle with violence or rage and anger and yelling and shouting and pushing people around and fighting, right? Those don't usually have a benefit. There are times that we do need to fight and defend ourselves, absolutely. There are times when that adrenaline kicking in is saving your life or helping you save someone else's life. So, like I mentioned before, anger is not necessarily always a bad thing, but there is an element of needing to maintain some level of control over that anger so that you can direct it in the appropriate channels and not hurt innocent bystanders, not hurt yourself, not make things worse. Don't lose your head, right? Just that's as simple as it is. You can be angry, but don't lose your head. And don't fly off the handle in a way that hurts people that are just bystanders, right? So, that's another part of this Aries shadow to consider is what is your relationship with anger? How much control do you maintain when you are angry? How prone are you to fits of rage? Do you lose your head when you get angry? These are parts of your shadow that perhaps need some examining, and you don't have to judge that part of yourself as bad as much as acknowledge it and decide whether you want to work on it or not. Decide whether you want to find ways to direct your anger and passion in ways that are actually helpful and not hurtful. And that's your shadow work, is just acknowledging and accepting that part of yourself so that you can decide whether or not you're going to work on that part of yourself or not. Okay, so another thing is being overly protective or overly defensive. So Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars is the warrior. The job of the warrior is to defend and protect. However, just like everything else, that energy can be taken too far or misguided, misused. When the warrior energy is misused, it switches from the protective force to the oppressive force. So a parent can protect their child, but taken to the extreme of overprotection, they become the child's oppressor and stop that child from experiencing life and learning things on their own. So there's a lot of examples of times that our desire to protect or defend something or someone can cross the line into us being controlling, right? An army or a police force can be used to protect people, and then it can just as easily be used to turn around and oppress people. So when you think about your own nature of how you protect or how you defend, think about how easy it is or how hard it is for you to take that protective and defensive energy and flip it to oppressive, controlling energy. And again, being protective and defensive isn't the problem. It's how you implement that energy of protection that is either actually protective or oppressive and controlling. So that's another part of the Aries shadow to consider as we have this dark moon in Aries. Another shadow of Aries energy is being too pushy or bossy. So you're saying my way or the highway. Again, standing up for yourself and your ideals is wonderful. Pushing your ideals and values on others, however, not so great. You do want to assert yourself to protect your rights, but you have to remember that your rights end where another person's rights begin, right? So no one likes a person who is always being pushy and bossy to get their way at the expense of other people not getting their way and other people having to give up their comfort or happiness or their rights in order to satisfy this person's rights. So again, Aries, like, it's beautiful and wonderful when that Aries archetype can help us stand up for ourselves and hold our boundaries and say, yes, I want this. No, I don't want that. But we don't want to be so like assertive for our own needs that we stomp all over the needs of other people. So we don't want to take that assertiveness to a point of being pushy and bossy and not paying attention to what other people need. And that can also look like selfishness. So it's okay to be selfish sometimes. I believe that there is a such thing as sacred selfishness, and we talk about this in my spiritual community. Sacred selfishness is taking that moment to ask for something that you want just because you want it, right? There's a lot of times in our culture when we're told, no, we can't have things, or you don't deserve this, you didn't earn it, you're not good enough. And being sacredly selfish is saying, you know what? I do deserve nice things. I do deserve comfort and love and like to feel good, right? So it's okay to ask for those things and to go out and get those things. It's okay to say, I'm not going to go out tonight to do this thing because I don't want to, and I'm tired and I'm going to stay home and take care of myself, right? You don't want to be a pushover that always lets other people walk all over you and you never choose your own comfort. You deserve comfort. However, there is a point where taking care of your own needs crosses the line of other people's needs. So if you're always tending to your own needs and ignoring the needs of others, and you're unwilling to compromise, and you're just like, nope, this is what I want, and too bad for everyone else, then that's when you've taken selfishness and it's not sacred anymore. It's just ugly selfishness. It's harming other people or stomping on other people in order to get your own way. And it's not a good look. So, there's benefit in examining, like, am I taking time for sacred selfishness? But then also having the awareness to make sure that when you are reaching for that thing that makes you feel good, you're not taking it away from someone else, right? And you're not putting someone down or making someone else feel worse in order for you to feel good. There are ways for you to achieve comfort without taking comfort away from someone else. And that's really the key, is finding that balance. So then finally, impulsivity. Sometimes this can go to a point of reckless impulsivity, right? So charging ahead, jumping into things quickly, taking quick action. There are absolutely times when this energy is needed and beneficial. We need that Aries energy to kickstart things and get things started once in a while, right? In emergencies, when there's danger, and sometimes people have these sudden surge of energy from that adrenaline rush, and they jumped into action without even thinking, and they lifted up the car and pulled out the person that was trapped under the car. This is that, like, really like impulsive, fiery Aries energy of just jumping into action without thinking. It was an adrenaline rush. They did it. They didn't think about it. And then later they go, I don't know how I did that. I didn't even think about it. I just acted. So that's like an example of that Aries impulsivity being a really powerful, beneficial thing. Yet there are times when this recklessness will cause harm or make things worse. The same accident or emergency situation was potentially caused by someone who was being impulsive and acting without thinking. So this is a shadow side of Aries energy. We do sometimes need to be able to jump in without hesitation and without thinking. But sometimes that's going to result in harm or tragedy. There is an element of risk involved when you act impulsively. If you don't stop to think and you just act, you're taking a risk. You're rolling the dice. Maybe this will work out, maybe it won't, right? And sometimes that pays off. And you have to be willing to accept the consequences of that risk that you're taking, even when things don't turn out the way that you intended. So there's a difference, I think, between being impulsive in a state of emergency when maybe that impulsivity is needed versus being impulsive for fun or because it made people laugh or because you're trying to show off or get someone's attention, right? So there's, or because you're angry at someone, like, oh, there's a lot of Aries things going on with impulsivity that can cause that impulsivity to be reckless and probably not a good time to throw the dice and take a risk. There are other times when taking that risk is worthwhile. So when it comes to being impulsive, like I said, being impulsive is not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to know that when you act impulsively, you're taking a risk, you're rolling the dice, and you're going to have to be willing to accept the consequences of how things turned out. Because you have to remember that, like, even with the best intentions, your what's actually important is the impact that you had. And so people often act impulsively, and then if something bad happens, they're like, oh, well, that's not what I meant to happen. That wasn't my intention. Well, sorry, like, your intention doesn't matter as much as what the impact actually was. And here's the result of your action, and you have to deal with that consequence. So that's just another part of the Aries shadow to consider during this dark moon. So I do have a written version of all of this on my Patreon blog. I have a dark moon feature that I post every month for members of my Patreon who are signed up for $10 a month or more. So if you are a member of the Patreon, you can see a written form of this blog too. And that is patreon.com/Hestia's Muse. I do want to point out that, like, I did talk about a lot of the shadow side of Aries. And this is not to say that all people who have an Aries sun do these things. I'm not making generalizations about people with Aries placements in their chart. I am just simply talking about the archetype of Aries, which we all experience to some degree or another, and we all have these energies within us to some degree or another, and here's the shadow side of those energies. Hopefully I was able to impress upon you that, like, there's a good side to standing up for yourself, for being impulsive, to being protective and defensive, and to having courage and strength. Those are all beautiful, amazing parts of Aries energy that all of us can and should embody. There are downsides to those same things. It's like they're two sides of a same coin. On one side, you can take that energy and make it really powerful and impactful in good ways. And on the other side, you can take that same energy and push it too far and have a negative or harmful impact on yourself or the world around you. So the dark moon is a really good time to just examine that shadow aspect of this energy. It is the end of the lunar month that started with the Aries new moon. And so we've had a whole month of being in this Aries energy. The sun has been in Aries, and so we're concluding that energy. On the night of April 19th, the waning dark moon will reach the conjunction with Aries, with the Aries sun, and it will be a new moon and a solar eclipse. The solar eclipse is not visible here in the United States. It is visible, I think, in parts of Australia and the Philippines. So that part of the world has a visible solar eclipse. Here we can just energetically feel it as a really, really intense new moon. And the other thing about that is this new moon is happening at 29 degrees, 50 seconds Aries. So it's right at the very end. So while it is still a new moon and while it is still in the eclipse phase, it is going to move into Taurus. So we have the new moon technically in Aries, 17 minutes after the exact sun-moon conjunction, the moon will move into Taurus. And so in some ways, it is a Taurus new moon because the majority of the time that it is in that waxing phase, but still in a close 10-degree conjunction with the sun, it will be in Taurus. Also, during the night, the sun will move into Taurus also. So it will move over there shortly after the moon does. And then we have most of the day on April 20th, that the moon is in Taurus and it is still a new moon. So there is that. It's a little bit of Aries new moon and then a lot more of a Taurus new moon. I do also have something coming out on the blog on my Patreon that will kind of explain that new moon and the eclipse energy a bit more in detail. And that I believe is going to be a public post, which will be available for anyone to read, whether you're a member of the Patreon or not. But I do encourage you to sign up and join my Patreon, especially if you enjoyed watching this video or listening to this episode, because your support helps me, empowers me to make more content like this and keep on posting stuff like this on my social media feeds. So I really appreciate any support. Joining my Patreon is a great way to give monthly support. And you can also email me at hestiasmuse@gmail.com to set up a private astrology reading one-on-one if you want to have a deeper look at your astrological chart. So I hope that you got something out of this episode and that you can take some time during this dark moon to rest, reflect, take care of yourself, do a little shadow work if it's healthy. Again, not to judge yourself or cast shame or guilt on yourself for anything that you deem negative, but just to see it so that you can begin to integrate it into your consciousness so that you can begin to work on it and you can decide whether this is a part of you that you want to change or not. And then it's not your shadow anymore because you see it and you're aware of it. So I hope that this helps. I hope it helps you understand the dichotomy of the archetype of Aries as having both positive and negative traits, for lack of better way of describing it. And I hope to make another video again very soon. So check back and we will see where the pod or vlog goes from here. Thank you so much. See you later.